What if the worst moment of your life became the beginning of everything? Imagine this. You're at the most important event of your career, surrounded by everyone who holds your future in their hands. Suddenly the man you once trusted, the man with all the power, takes the stage and begins to publicly crucify you. He twists your ambition into a weapon and tries to shame you into oblivion. The room falls silent. There's nowhere to hide. But then a voice cuts through the humiliation, a voice belonging to the most powerful man in the room, a billionaire investor everyone is desperate to impress. And he doesn't just defend you, he calls you his fiancée. Stay with us as we unfold the story of Celeste, a woman whose world was shattered and rebuilt in a single night, all because of a lie that might just hold more truth than she could ever imagine. The air in the atrium at the Sterling Tower tasted of champagne and ambition. It was a glittering, suffocating atmosphere that Celeste Monroe had only ever read about. Tonight she was breathing it. Hundreds of glass panels soared 50 stories high, encasing the gala in a crystalline cocoon that reflected the sprawling, indifferent lights of Chicago. Below, men in bespoke tuxedos and women in liquid silk gowns moved like schools of exotic fish, their laughter echoing in sharp, bright bursts. For Celeste, it felt less like a celebration and more like a final exam. At 26, she was the youngest associate architect at Stone & Sterling, a firm so prestigious its name was whispered with the same reverence as the old masters. Tonight was the firm's annual awards ceremony, a self-congratulatory spectacle designed to reinforce the rigid hierarchy that governed their world. Her project, a sleek, sustainable library design for a university arts campus, was shortlisted for the Visionary of the Year award. Winning it wouldn't just be a validation, it would be a lifeline, a way to finally prove she belonged on merit, not tolerance. She smoothed down the simple, deep navy dress she'd spent 2 months' savings on. It was elegant but understated, a stark contrast to the diamond-dusted creations that drifted past her. She felt like a wren in a flock of peacocks. "Nervous, Monroe?" The voice, a familiar baritone laced with condescending amusement, slid up behind her. Adrian Stone. Of course, he was the Stone in Stone & Sterling, or he would be one day. Son of the managing partner, Robert Stone, Adrian was handsome in a way that seemed machine-tooled, perfect hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of old money. He was also the reason her heart hammered against her ribs for all the wrong reasons. They had a history, a brief, regrettable one that had lasted for a handful of weeks a year ago. To her, it had been a whirlwind of intoxicating attention from the firm's golden boy. To him, she'd later realized, it was a dalliance, a conquest. She had ended it when she saw the casual cruelty beneath his charm, the way he dismissed a waiter, the sneer he reserved for junior staff. His ego had been wounded, and ever since he'd treated her with a cold, simmering disdain, a constant reminder of her place in his world. "A little," she admitted, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a big night." Adrian's gaze swept over her, a slow, appraising look that made her skin crawl. "Don't get your hopes up. The university library is a cute little project, but it's not the Sterling Tower renovation." He gestured vaguely at the magnificent building they were in, his project. "Some designs have weight, others are decorative." The insult was designed to sting, and it did. It was a reminder of the power imbalance that defined their every interaction. He was born into this world. She had clawed her way in with scholarships, all-nighters fueled by cheap coffee, and a talent she was terrified would never be enough. She saw his father, Robert Stone, across the room, holding court. He was a titan of the industry, a man whose approval could make or break a career. He caught Celeste's eye and gave her a curt, unsmiling nod. It was the most acknowledgement she'd ever received from him. A server offered her a flute of champagne, and she took it, the cold glass a small anchor in the overwhelming sea of power and influence. She scanned the crowd, looking for a friendly face, but found none. Her colleagues were all orbiting their superiors, their expressions a carefully calibrated mix of deference and ambition. Then she saw him. He was standing near the far end of the atrium, partially obscured by a marble pillar, looking out at the city lights. He wasn't part of the chattering, preening crowd. He stood apart, an island of stillness in the churning social current. He was tall, dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored black suit, no tie. There was an austerity to him that was more intimidating than all the flash in the room combined. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and his face, etched with lines of thought and concentration, was compelling. She had no idea who he was, but he radiated an aura of quiet, absolute authority. He felt different, dangerous. Suddenly a hush fell over the room. Robert Stone was tapping a glass at the podium. It was time. "Welcome, friends, colleagues, titans of industry," Robert's voice boomed, filled with practiced bonhomie. "Tonight we celebrate not just steel and glass, but vision, the courage to reshape our world, one blueprint at a time." Celeste's stomach twisted into a knot. She took a shaky sip of champagne. The preliminary awards were announced, a blur of names and polite applause. Her category was last. She felt Adrian's eyes on her from his seat at the front table. He wore a smirk that set her teeth on edge. "And now," Robert continued, his smile widening, "for the Visionary of the Year award. This award recognizes a designer who has shown not just skill, but soul. A designer who has pushed the boundaries of what's possible." This year the board was deeply impressed by two projects in particular: the Sterling Tower renovation, led by Adrian Stone. A wave of applause, loud and sycophantic, filled the atrium. Adrian stood and gave a small, arrogant bow. And the Oakhaven University Arts Library, led by Celeste Monroe. The applause for her was polite, scattered, a smattering of claps in the vast, glittering space. She felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to her, judging, weighing. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. Robert Stone held up the gleaming crystal award. "To present this award, I'd like to invite my son, the future of this firm, Adrian Stone, to the stage." Celeste froze. Why Adrian? This was a break in protocol. A cold dread, slick and oily, washed over her. Adrian walked to the podium, taking the microphone from his father. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at her. His smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, righteous fury. "Thank you, Father," he began, his voice dangerously smooth. "Vision, soul, these are important words, but so are others. Words like integrity, honesty, originality." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. The Oakhaven Library is indeed a remarkable design. Its core concepts, the floating mezzanine, the light well diffusion system, are truly innovative. So innovative, in fact, that I came up with them myself 6 months ago. The silence in the atrium was no longer polite. It was a living, breathing entity, a predator that had just caught the scent of blood. Celeste's champagne flute felt impossibly heavy in her hand, the bubbles dying against the glass. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I came up with them myself. A collective rustling gasp went through the crowd. Whispers erupted like sparks in dry grass. People weren't looking at Adrian anymore. They were looking at her. Hundreds of eyes, sharp with morbid curiosity, pinned her in place. Her navy dress, once a shield of understated elegance, now felt like a target. Celeste's mind struggled to catch up. It was a joke. It had to be a cruel, terrible joke. But the look on Adrian's face was one of absolute conviction. He was performing, playing the part of the magnanimous leader forced to expose a painful truth. "I mentored Ms. Monroe when she first joined us," Adrian continued, his voice dripping with faux sorrow. "I shared my private notebooks, my conceptual sketches for a residential project. I wanted to help a promising young architect from a less privileged background find her footing. The classist jab was deliberate, a twist of the knife. He was painting a picture for them, the wealthy, generous scion and the poor, grasping nobody who took advantage of his kindness. Her blood ran cold. The floating mezzanine, the light well system, those were hers. They were born from 1,000 sleepless nights, from dozens of sketchbooks filled with frantic, coffee-stained drawings. They were the culmination of a childhood spent marveling at how sunlight fell through the leaves of an old oak tree in her backyard. They were the most original parts of herself she had ever put on paper. "I suppose I was naive," Adrian said with a theatrical sigh. "I never imagined that my concepts, my intellectual property, would be lifted wholesale and submitted for an award under her name." He held up his hands as if to quell a protest that no one was making. "I don't say this out of malice. I say it out of a duty to protect the integrity of this firm and the sanctity of our creative process. True vision cannot be stolen." The accusation settled over Celeste like a shroud. Every head was turned towards her. She saw the expressions, pity from some, contempt from others, and a cold, clinical curiosity from most. They were watching her unravel, and it was the most exciting thing that had happened all night. She looked to Robert Stone, who stood beside his son, his face an unreadable mask of granite. He wouldn't meet her gaze. He was allowing this to happen. Of course he was. He would always protect his son, his legacy. The heat rushed to her face, a painful, prickling blush that felt like it was scorching her from the inside out. Her throat closed up. She wanted to scream, to shout that he was lying, to show them her notebooks filled with the design's evolution over 2 years. But what good would it do? It was her word, the word of a scholarship kid from the suburbs, against the heir to the Stone Empire. The scales of justice in this room were weighted with gold, and she had none. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. Her colleagues, people she'd shared lunches and project deadlines with, now studied the intricate patterns on the ceiling or the contents of their wine glasses. To defend her would be career suicide. Therefore, Adrian announced, his voice ringing with finality, while the board congratulates Ms. Monroe on her ambition, we cannot, in good conscience, grant the award for this project. He placed the crystal trophy back on the podium with a decisive thud. The Visionary of the Year award goes to the Sterling Tower renovation. The applause was hesitant at first, then grew stronger as people took their cue from Robert Stone, who began clapping firmly, his expression unchanged. Adrian accepted the adulation, a conquering hero who had bravely rooted out corruption. For Celeste, the world had narrowed to a roaring in her ears. The glittering atrium, the sea of faces, the triumphant smirk on Adrian's face, it all blurred into a sickening vortex. Humiliation was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it impossible to breathe. He hadn't just tried to shame her, he had tried to erase her, to strip her of her talent, her work, her very identity as an architect, and leave her with nothing. It was a public execution of her career. She had to get out. She put her untouched champagne flute down on a passing tray with a trembling hand and turned to flee, to find a dark corner where she could shatter in private. But a voice, calm and clear as a bell, cut through the applause and the murmurs. "I believe you're mistaken, Mr. Stone." The voice came from the direction of the marble pillar. The man who had been watching the city now stepped into the light. All motion in the room seemed to stop. The whispering died. The applause faltered. Even Adrian, basking in his victory, turned with a look of stunned surprise. The man walked forward with an unhurried, deliberate pace. As he moved, a wave of recognition and deference rippled through the crowd. People parted for him as if by instinct. Robert Stone's face, previously a stony mask, paled. "Mr. Finch," Robert stammered, stepping forward. I wasn't aware you were here." Alistair Finch. The name clicked in Celeste's mind. The reclusive, legendary billionaire, a titan of tech and real estate who was notoriously private and brutally discerning. His firm was rumored to be looking for an architectural partner for a multi-billion-dollar global headquarters project. The kind of contract that could elevate a firm into the stratosphere. His presence here was the unspoken high-stakes prize everyone was playing for. Finch didn't acknowledge Robert. His eyes, a startlingly sharp shade of grey, were fixed on Adrian. They were cold, analytical, and utterly unimpressed. "Your assumption is incorrect," Finch stated, his voice carrying easily in the now silent room. He stopped a few feet from the podium, his presence commanding the space more effectively than Adrian's manufactured drama ever could. "Ms. Monroe couldn't possibly have been working on your designs for the past 6 months. He paused, letting the silence stretch, drawing every ounce of attention to his next words. He turned his gaze slightly, and for the first time, he looked directly at Celeste. The intensity in his eyes was staggering, but there was something else there too, a lifeline. "She's been far too busy working on ours." Another collective gasp. Robert Stone looked as if he'd been struck. Adrian, thrown off balance, sputtered, "Working on yours? What are you talking about? We have no contract with you." Alistair Finch's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. It was a weapon. He took another step forward, closing the distance until he was standing beside Celeste. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a stark contrast to the icy dread that filled her veins. He gently, possessively, placed a hand on the small of her back. The gesture was so unexpected, so shocking, it sent a jolt through her entire body. He looked from Adrian to the stunned audience, his gaze sweeping over them all, a king surveying his court. "You see," Alistair Finch declared, his voice resonating with unshakable authority, "it's a private commission, a passion project. We've had to be very discreet." He then looked down at Celeste, his expression softening just enough to be convincing. "Isn't that right, my love?" he said, his voice a low murmur meant for her, yet heard by all. "It's difficult to focus on side projects when you're designing a life with your fiancée." Fiancée. The word detonated in the silent atrium. It was not a whisper. It was a sonic boom that shattered the last vestiges of Adrian's smug victory. For a dizzying moment, Celeste thought she had misheard, that the roaring in her ears had finally conjured a phantom sound. But the collective sharp intake of breath from hundreds of people confirmed it. The hand on her back was a firm, grounding pressure, the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Adrian's face went from triumphant to slack-jawed disbelief. The colour drained from his cheeks, leaving his perfect tan-looking sallow under the expensive lighting. He stared at Alistair Finch, then at Celeste, then back again, his mind visibly failing to compute this new, impossible reality. Robert Stone looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. His mouth opened and closed silently, a fish gasping for air. Alistair Finch, however, was an oasis of calm in the hurricane he had created. He ignored the chaos, his entire focus on Celeste. His grey eyes, which had seemed so cold and analytical before, now held a question. It was a silent, urgent communication. "Play along. This is your way out." Her mind was a maelstrom of shock and fear, but beneath it, a tiny, desperate instinct for survival flickered to life. Adrian had pushed her to the edge of a cliff. This stranger, this billionaire, had just offered her a hand. She didn't know if he meant to pull her up or drag her down with him, but letting go meant falling into the abyss Adrian had dug for her. She took a breath. It was shallow and shaky, but it was a breath. She looked up at Alistair Finch, summoning every last ounce of her courage. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was all he needed. His faint, weaponized smile returned as he addressed the dumbfounded crowd. "My fiancée has a brilliant mind. I won't have her integrity questioned or her talent attributed to a man who clearly doesn't recognize it." His gaze sliced back to Adrian. "Perhaps, Mr. Stone, your memory is failing you. Or perhaps you've simply made a habit of claiming the work of talented women as your own. Either way, it's a profound disappointment." The accusation was surgical. He had taken Adrian's own weapon, a public shaming based on a lie, and turned it back on him with devastating precision. Adrian flinched as if physically struck. The whispers in the crowd were no longer about Celeste's supposed plagiarism. They were now about Adrian's character, his credibility. In the space of 30 seconds, Alistair Finch had completely rewritten the narrative. He didn't wait for a response. His hand still firmly on her back, he began to guide her through the stunned, parting crowd. "I believe we're leaving," he said, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. As they walked, the silence broke. A cacophony of hushed conversations erupted behind them. The power dynamic of the entire evening, of the entire Chicago architectural world, had just been irrevocably tilted. They were halfway to the grand entrance when Robert Stone finally found his voice. "Mr. Finch, please," he called out, hurrying after them. "A moment, this is a misunderstanding." Alistair paused but didn't turn. "The only thing I misunderstand, Robert," he said, his tone dropping several degrees, "is why you would allow such a pathetic spectacle to take place at an event meant to celebrate talent. It reflects poorly on your firm's leadership." He finally turned his head slightly. "And on your judgment." With that final crushing verdict, he continued walking, leading Celeste out of the crystalline cage and into the cool, clean night air. The oppressive atmosphere of the gala fell away, replaced by the distant sounds of city traffic and the fresh breeze off Lake Michigan. A sleek black car, so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it, pulled up to the curb silently. A driver held the door open. Alistair guided her into the plush leather interior before getting in beside her. The door closed with a soft, solid thud, sealing them in a cocoon of profound silence. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding through the city streets. Celeste stared out the window, watching the glittering towers of Chicago slide by in a blur. Her body was trembling, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline and the shock. Her mind raced, replaying the last 10 minutes on a loop. Adrian's venomous speech, the crushing weight of hundreds of judging eyes, and then Alistair Finch, appearing like a spectre to utter a single world-altering word. "Fiancée." She turned to look at the man beside her. In the dim, ambient light of the car, the sharp planes of his face were softened, but his intensity was undiminished. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. It was the first thing he'd said directly to her since his shocking pronouncement. She couldn't find the words. She just shook her head, a wave of emotion, gratitude, terror, confusion, welling up and choking her. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cold cheek. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a folded, crisp white handkerchief, and handed it to her. The gesture was old-fashioned and strangely comforting. She took it, the fine linen cool against her skin. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why did you do that?" Alistair Finch was silent for a long moment, watching the city lights play across his hands, which were resting loosely in his lap. "Adrian Stone is an arrogant fool who mistakes privilege for talent," he said finally, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "His father is a man who values loyalty to his bloodline over professional integrity. I have no patience for either. But to say that, to call me to say we're engaged." She couldn't bring herself to say the word again. It felt alien in her mouth. He finally turned to face her, his grey eyes searching her face. It was the most effective tool at my disposal. In that room, a professional defense would have been debated. A personal one, however, is a declaration of war. It left no room for argument. "You've started a war for a complete stranger," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "I don't believe in strangers," he replied cryptically. "Only in people whose motives I do not yet understand." He paused. "And I saw your design for the Oakhaven Library. I read the proposal. It was brilliant, understated, innovative, and deeply human. It was not the work of a thief." Hearing him say that, hearing someone of his stature validate her work after Adrian had so brutally tried to annihilate it, caused another wave of tears to well in her eyes. She pressed the handkerchief to her face, mortified. "I apologize," he said, misinterpreting her tears. "I put you in an impossible position. It was a calculated risk, and you were the collateral. But it was the only move I had that would not only save you from that situation, but utterly destroy him. I assure you by morning, Adrian Stone will be a laughingstock." She lowered the handkerchief, taking a shuddering breath. He was right. He had saved her. But she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was no fairy tale. This was not a prince rescuing a damsel. This was a king moving a pawn in a game she didn't understand. He had pulled her from the fire, but she had no idea where he was taking her now. The car continued its silent journey through the sleeping city, carrying her toward a future that was even more uncertain than the one she had just escaped. The car didn't take her home to her small third-floor walk-up in Lincoln Park. Instead, it glided into a private underground garage beneath a sleek, impossibly tall skyscraper on the Gold Coast. The building was a whisper of dark glass and steel, so exclusive it didn't even have a name on the facade. The silence in the car had stretched, filled only by the low hum of the engine and the frantic beating of Celeste's own heart. She had run out of tears, leaving a hollow, buzzing exhaustion in their place. Alistair led her to a private elevator that opened directly into his penthouse. The doors slid open not to a hallway, but to a vast open space that seemed to hang suspended in the night sky. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a breathtaking 180-degree panorama of Chicago and the dark sleeping expanse of Lake Michigan. The decor was minimalist to the point of being monastic. Polished concrete floors, a few pieces of low-slung, exquisitely designed furniture, and a collection of what looked like museum-quality architectural models displayed on illuminated shelves. There was no clutter, no personal photographs. It was less a home and more a statement of intent, a space designed for observation, not for living. Alistair gestured towards a deep leather sofa. "Please, can I get you something? Water? A brandy?" "Water would be fine," she murmured, sinking into the sofa. The leather was cool and soft, a small, tangible comfort in a situation that felt entirely unreal. He moved to a discreet built-in bar and returned with a heavy crystal glass of water. He didn't sit beside her, but took a seat in an armchair opposite, maintaining a deliberate distance. He watched her for a moment as she drank, his expression unreadable. "I owe you an explanation," he began, his voice calm and measured, "and an apology. What I did tonight was impulsive, but not without purpose." Celeste placed the glass down on the slate coaster he'd set on the table. Her hands were steady now. The initial shock was receding, replaced by a dawning, sharp-edged clarity. "You used me," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. He didn't deny it. "I did," he admitted, his directness surprising her. "But you were already being used, Ms. Monroe, by Stone. He was using you as a scapegoat to secure an award and eliminate a competitor he felt threatened by. The difference is, his use for you was finished. He was discarding you." "And you? What's your use for me?" she asked, a spark of defiance in her voice. A flicker of something, was it respect, crossed his features. "My company, Finch Industries, is on the verge of the largest expansion in its history. Part of that involves finalizing a merger with a very old, very conservative European conglomerate. They value stability, tradition, and image above all else. I, however, have a reputation for being unpredictable. A bachelor, relentlessly focused on work. It makes them nervous." He leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes intense. "For the past year, my rivals have been trying to sabotage this merger. They've manufactured scandals, spread rumors. What I need, for the next 6 months, is an unbreachable defense, an image of serene stability, a fiancée." The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. It was a business proposition, a cold, calculated move in a corporate game she couldn't even fathom. "So you saw me," she pieced it together, her voice flat. A woman being publicly humiliated with no connections, no power. the perfect blank slate for you to project this image onto. I saw an opportunity for mutual benefit, he corrected gently. I saw a talented architect being destroyed by a system I despise. I needed a fiancé. You needed a future. I decided in that moment to align our interests. The sheer audacity of it left her breathless. He operated on a level of strategic thinking that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. So this is a job offer, she clarified, the word job sounding absurd in this context. You want to hire me to be your fiancé. I want to propose a partnership, he countered. A contract. For 6 months, you play the part. We attend a handful of key events together. We present a united, stable front to the world. You'll have to move out of your apartment, of course. For appearances, you'll live here. He gestured to the vast, empty penthouse. Celeste's mind reeled. Live here? Pretend to be in love with this powerful, enigmatic stranger? It was insane. It was the plot of a ridiculous movie. And in return, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. This was the crux of it. This was where the king named his price. In return, Alistair said, standing up and walking over to the shelves of architectural models, I will destroy stone and sterling. I will ensure the truth of Adrian's plagiarism is brought to light, systematically and reputationally, until he and his father have nothing left. But revenge is a hollow prize. He picked up a small, intricate model of a cantilevered house. More importantly, at the end of the 6 months, I will provide the seed funding for you to start your own firm, not a loan. An investment, no strings attached. You will have complete creative control. Your own projects, your own vision, your own name above the door. Monroe Designs. Her breath hitched. He wasn't just offering her a shield, he was offering her the one thing she had ever truly wanted. Freedom. A chance to build, to create, without the suffocating politics and sexism of a firm like Stone's. It was her wildest, most secret dream, spoken aloud by a man she'd met only an hour ago. The psychological conflict was tearing her apart. Her pride, her sense of self, screamed at her to refuse, to walk out that door and somehow fight this on her own. It felt like trading one form of servitude for another, a gilded cage for the one she'd just escaped. But her pragmatism, the part of her that knew how the world really worked, the part that had watched her parents work 2 jobs each their entire lives, knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. He was offering her a kingdom. The price was her life for 6 months. She stood up, her legs feeling stronger than she expected. She walked towards him, stopping in front of the window, her reflection a ghostly silhouette against the glittering cityscape. If I do this, she said, turning to face him, there are terms. My terms. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. This is a business arrangement. You will treat me as a partner, not an employee. You will not expect anything more than my public performance. The words came out stiffly, but she had to say them. That was always my intention, Ms. Monroe, he said, his expression unblinking. I am not Adrian Stone. And my work, she continued, gaining confidence. I'm not just a prop. I'm an architect. I want access to your resources, your library. I will spend these 6 months designing, building my portfolio for my own firm. I will not sit here like a doll in a dollhouse. For the first time that night, Alistair Finch's lips curved into a genuine smile. It transformed his face, chasing away some of the cold austerity and revealing a startling warmth. I would expect nothing less, he said. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Ms. Monroe? She looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. This was a deal with the devil, or an angel, she wasn't sure which. But he was the only one offering her a path forward. She was done being a victim. If she was going to be a pawn, she would be the most strategic, powerful pawn on the board, one that could one day become a queen. She put her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and secure. Oh, we have an agreement, Mr. Finch. The first few weeks of their engagement were a masterclass in controlled awkwardness. Celeste moved into the penthouse, her 2 suitcases of belongings looking laughably out of place in the cavernous, minimalist space. Alistair had a guest wing prepared for her, a suite of rooms that was larger than her entire old apartment, ensuring a physical and symbolic distance between them. They were two strangers orbiting each other in a multi-million-dollar galaxy, bound by a contract and a shared deception. Their days were structured and separate. He would disappear into his home office before dawn, immersed in the relentless machinations of his global empire. Celeste, true to her word, transformed her living area into a makeshift design studio. Alistair gave her unfettered access to his company's formidable digital resources and his personal library, a stunning two-story room filled with rare books on architecture and design. For the first time in her life, she had unlimited tools and no one looking over her shoulder. She threw herself into her work with a ferocity born of newfound freedom, sketching designs for low-income housing, community centers, and public parks, the kind of soulful projects that Stone and Sterling would have sneered at. Their evenings were when the performance began. Twice a week, Alistair's assistant, a severe but efficient woman named Maria, would provide an itinerary, a charity dinner, an opera, a private gallery opening. For each event, a stylist would appear with a rack of designer clothes, and Celeste would be transformed from a hard-working architect into Alistair Finch's beautiful, enigmatic fiancée. She learned her role quickly. She learned to smile when a camera flashed, to rest her hand on Alistair's arm with practiced ease, to laugh at the jokes of men whose names she would forget by morning. She became adept at answering the inevitable questions about their story. "We met through a mutual acquaintance," she would say, a line they had rehearsed. "It was a very private, whirlwind romance. We wanted to keep it to ourselves for as long as possible." Alistair was a brilliant partner in the deception. In public, he was subtly attentive, his hand resting on her back, his gaze finding hers across a crowded room. He made the world believe it, and sometimes, in fleeting moments, his performance was so convincing she almost believed it herself. But as soon as the car door closed at the end of the night, the facade would drop. The warmth would recede from his eyes, and he would become the focused, distant businessman once more. They would ride the elevator up in silence and part ways with a quiet, "Good night, Celeste," and "Good night, Alistair." It was during one quiet Tuesday night, nearly a month into their arrangement, that the first crack in his armor appeared. There was no event scheduled. Celeste was hunched over her drafting table, lost in the schematics for a children's community center, when he emerged from his office. He wasn't wearing one of his severe suits, but a simple grey cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked younger, less like a titan of industry, and more like a man. He didn't speak, just watched her for a moment from across the room. She felt his presence and looked up, her pencil hovering over the paper. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You're not," she said, stretching her arms over her head. "I've been staring at this wall section for 2 hours. I think my brain has melted." He walked over, his eyes drawn to the blueprints spread across her table. He studied them with an architect's focus, his gaze tracing the lines, taking in the flow of the spaces she had designed. "A community center," he observed. "In the Bronzeville neighborhood," she explained, her passion for the project bubbling to the surface. "The idea is to use reclaimed materials and passive solar design. It's meant to be a space that gives back to the community instead of just taking up space within it." He pointed to a specific detail on the drawing. "This curved wall, it's non-load-bearing. Purely aesthetic, yet it guides the entire flow of the ground floor. It pulls you in from the entrance and directs you towards the open library space. It's very clever." Celeste was taken aback. He hadn't just glanced at it. He saw it. He understood the intent behind the lines, the architectural language she was speaking. "Thank you," she said, genuinely surprised. "I started out wanting to be an architect," he confessed, his gaze still on her designs. The admission was so unexpected it felt like a seismic event in their quiet, controlled world. A long time ago, before all of this. He gestured vaguely at the penthouse, at the city beyond, at the empire he commanded. He then led her to his private study, a room she had never entered. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, this space was personal. The shelves were filled not just with books, but with dozens of small, exquisitely detailed architectural models. They were models of buildings that had never been built, fantastical, impossible structures that defied gravity and convention. "These were mine," he said, a note of something wistful in his voice. "My designs, from another life." She saw it then. A flash of the young man he must have been, a dreamer, a creator, before the weight of his inheritance and the world of ruthless business had reshaped him. It was a moment of profound, shared vulnerability. They weren't billionaire and fake fiancé. They were two architects, two builders, speaking the same silent language of form and function. As they stood there, a news alert pinged on his phone. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened, the brief moment of softness vanishing. He showed her the screen. The headline read, "Adrian Stone resigns from firm amid allegations of creative misconduct." The article detailed an anonymous but thoroughly sourced leak of Adrian's early project files, which showed a pattern of him taking credit for the work of junior female associates. The Sterling Tower Award had been officially rescinded. His career was in ruins. "That was you," Celeste stated, looking up at him. "I simply ensured the truth found its way to the right people," he said coolly. She should have felt triumphant. It was justice. But seeing the clinical, detached way Alistair had orchestrated Adrian's downfall was chilling. It was a reminder of the immense, terrifying power he wielded. He had done it for her, yes, but the ease with which he had destroyed a man sent a shiver down her spine. The blueprint for revenge was just as calculated as the blueprint for a building. The emotional shift between them was subtle but undeniable. That night, she saw the two sides of Alistair Finch, the passionate, frustrated artist and the cold, ruthless strategist. She was beginning to realize that the man was far more complex and dangerous than she had ever imagined, and their carefully constructed, fake relationship was starting to feel perilously real. The invitation arrived on a sheet of thick, cream-colored cardstock. The annual Foundation for Civic Arts Ball, the absolute pinnacle of Chicago's philanthropic scene. It was the kind of event where billion-dollar deals were brokered over canapes and reputations were cemented or shattered with a single, well-placed whisper. It was also, as Maria dryly informed them, the first major event where both Adrian's father, Robert Stone, and the board members of the European conglomerate Alistair was courting would be in attendance. This wasn't just a performance, it was their final exam. The night of the ball, Celeste stood before the mirror in her bedroom suite, feeling like an imposter in a fairy tale. The stylist had chosen a gown of deep emerald silk that clung to her frame before flaring out at the floor. It was a dress that radiated confidence, a quality she was desperately trying to borrow. Diamonds, loaned for the evening, glittered at her throat and ears. She looked like one of them. The thought was both thrilling and nauseating. When she walked into the main living area, Alistair was waiting by the window, a dark, commanding figure in a classic black tuxedo. He turned as she approached, and for a moment he simply stared. The practiced, cool appraisal was gone. His gaze was unguarded, filled with a raw admiration that made her heart skip a beat. "Celeste," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you look breathtaking." "You don't look so bad yourself, Mr. Finch," she replied, a genuine smile touching her lips. The formal surname was a joke between them now, a small nod to the absurdity of their situation. The air between them crackled with an unfamiliar tension. The carefully drawn lines of their business arrangement seemed to be blurring at the edges. At the ball, they were an immediate focal point. The story of their whirlwind romance and Alistair's dramatic defense of her at the Sterling Gala had become the stuff of society legend. They were a power couple, an enigma, and everyone wanted a piece of them. Alistair navigated the treacherous social waters with effortless grace, introducing her to titans of finance and art patrons, always with a subtle, proprietary touch on her arm that felt both staged and startlingly real. Later in the evening, the orchestra began to play a slow, languid waltz. Alistair turned to her. "May I have this dance, Miss Monroe?" he asked, his eyes glinting with a challenge. "Only if you can keep up," she retorted. He led her to the dance floor, and as he pulled her into his arms, the world seemed to fade away. Her hand rested on his shoulder, his on her waist. It was the closest they had ever been. She could feel the solid strength of his body, smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne. They moved together perfectly, two parts of a well-oiled machine designed to fool the world. But then something shifted. He looked down at her, his expression serious, his thumb gently stroking her back. The space between them was no longer a stage, it was an intimate, private world. The carefully constructed walls they had built around themselves began to crumble. She looked up at him, and she knew with a terrifying certainty that she was no longer acting. The emotion she felt, a dizzying mix of gratitude, admiration, and a deep, magnetic pull, was entirely her own. His gaze intensified, and he leaned in closer, his lips just inches from hers. The orchestra swelled, and in that moment she forgot the crowd, the contract, the lie. There was only him. "Alistair, Celeste, what a surprise to see you two out!" The voice, slurred and venomous, shattered the spell. They broke apart to see Adrian Stone standing there. He was a shadow of his former self. His tuxedo was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he swayed slightly, a glass of amber liquid clutched in his hand. He was alone. "Adrian," Alistair said, his voice dropping into a dangerously low register. He moved to stand slightly in front of Celeste, a protective stance that was pure instinct. "Don't you Adrian me," he sneered, his eyes fixing on Celeste with a pathetic, wounded glare. "Look at you. You really landed on your feet, didn't you? Traded up. Found a bigger wallet to steal from." "That's enough," Alistair warned. But Celeste stepped forward. The fear she used to feel around Adrian was gone, replaced by a cold, clear pity. "You should go home, Adrian," she said, her voice steady. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself?" He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You're the one who's a fraud, a hired—" Before he could finish the word, Robert Stone appeared, his face a mask of fury and shame. He grabbed his son's arm in a vice-like grip. "Not here," he hissed. "You've done enough damage." He dragged the drunk, stumbling Adrian away without so much as a glance in their direction. The encounter left Celeste shaken, but not for the reason she expected. She wasn't scared of Adrian. She was shaken by the fierce, untamed protectiveness she had seen in Alistair's eyes. Back at the penthouse, the silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with unspoken words. Celeste stood by the window, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Alistair said, coming to stand beside her. "Don't be," she said softly. "Tonight I finally understood. He doesn't have any power over me anymore." She turned to face him. "You gave me that." "You had it all along, Celeste," he said, his voice earnest. "I just cleared the way for you to see it." The dam of their carefully controlled emotions finally broke. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and a shiver went through her. "This wasn't just about the merger," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "What Adrian did to you, it was personal for me." He took a deep breath. "Years ago, when I was just starting out, I had a mentor, a brilliant architect named Arthur Monroe." Celeste's world tilted on its axis. "Monroe? That was my father's name." Alistair's eyes were filled with a deep old pain. "Yes, your father. He was the most talented designer I ever knew. Robert Stone was his business partner. Stone stole a major design from him, a design that launched his career and pushed your father out, bankrupting him and blacklisting him from the industry. It broke him. He never designed again. Tears streamed down Celeste's face as memories flooded back. Her father's quiet sadness, the abandoned drafting table in the basement, the dreams he never spoke of. When I saw Adrian doing the same thing to you, Alistair continued, his voice thick with emotion, to Arthur's daughter, I couldn't let it happen again. The agreement, the contract, it was an excuse, a way for me to help you without you feeling like it was charity, a way for me to finally, in some small way, honor my friend. He had been protecting his mentor's legacy all along. He had been protecting her. The space between them vanished. This time, it was Celeste who moved first. She reached up, her hands tangling in his hair, and pulled his face down to hers. Their lips met in a kiss that was not part of any performance. It was a raw, explosive release of 6 weeks of unspoken feelings, a collision of two lonely, guarded souls finding an unexpected anchor in a sea of lies. It was desperate and honest and terrifyingly real. The facade had not just cracked, it had been utterly and completely demolished. The 6-month contract, once a daunting expanse of time, now felt like a finish line they were both dreading. After the night of the ball, everything had changed. The pretense dissolved, leaving behind a fragile, tentative reality they were both afraid to name. The silence in the penthouse was no longer awkward. It was comfortable, filled with the quiet companionship of two people who understood each other without needing words. They ate breakfast together, discussing the news or going over the blueprints for Celeste's community center. In the evenings, he would listen for hours as she spoke with fiery passion about sustainable design and the social responsibility of architecture. She, in turn, began to see the man behind the billionaire, his dry wit, the weariness in his eyes after a transatlantic call, the genuine pleasure he took in her success. They were building something real in the scaffolding of their fake relationship. The final piece of their agreement fell into place a week before the contract was set to expire. Alistair's merger with the European conglomerate was approved. The official press release cited his newfound stability and partnership as a key factor in the board's confidence. Their deception had been a resounding success. That same afternoon, a courier delivered a thick portfolio to the penthouse. It was addressed to Celeste Monroe, principal architect. Inside were the finalized incorporation documents, the deed to a chic studio space in the River North Gallery district, and a bank statement for a corporate account funded with the exact amount Alistair had promised. It was all there. Monroe Designs was no longer a dream. It was a reality. She stood in the middle of the living room, clutching the documents to her chest. This was it, the culmination of everything. The freedom she had been sold, delivered in a manila envelope. She should have been ecstatic, but a profound sadness settled over her. Her firm was real, which meant her time here, with him, was over. The gilded cage was opening, and she found she was terrified to fly away. Alistair found her there, her expression a mixture of triumph and sorrow. He didn't need to ask what was in the portfolio. "Congratulations, Celeste," he said, his voice quiet. He kept his distance, a painful return to the formality of their early days. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her throat tight. "Thank you, Alistair, for everything." "I was simply fulfilling my end of our agreement," he said, the business-like words a stark contrast to the intimacy they had shared. The air was thick with things left unsaid, with the future that loomed between them, a future where they went their separate ways. "Is that all this was to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "An agreement?" He finally looked at her, his grey eyes turbulent with an emotion he could no longer hide. "No," he said, his voice raw. "It hasn't been just an agreement for a long time, but the contract is fulfilled. You have your freedom. I won't hold you to anything more." It was a pivotal moment. He was giving her an out, respecting the terms they had set, even if it cost him everything. He was letting her go. But Celeste was no longer the frightened, powerless woman from the Sterling Gala. She had spent the last 6 months finding her voice, owning her power, and falling in love with the most complicated man she had ever met. She would not let the best thing in her life slip away because of the fine print on a contract. She dropped the portfolio on the sofa and walked towards him, her steps sure and deliberate. "You're right," she said, stopping directly in front of him. "The contract is over, so I'd like to propose a new one." He looked at her, confused and wary. "A new one?" "A partnership," she said, her eyes locking with his. "A real one? No term limits? No clauses? No exit strategies?" She reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I don't want Monroe Designs if it doesn't have you in my life. I don't want freedom if it means being free from you." Relief and a dawning, brilliant joy washed over Alistair's face. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I love you, Celeste," he whispered, the words he had clearly been holding back for months. "I was so afraid to say it, to trap you." "You don't trap me," she murmured against his chest. "You anchor me." Their redemption wasn't a grand, public spectacle. It was a quiet, profound reconstruction of 2 lonely lives into one shared future. It wasn't about his revenge on the Stones or her career success. It was about the life they had built together when no one was watching. A few days later, as they were packing some of her things to move into the master suite, her personal laptop pinged. It was an email from an unknown address. The subject line was simply, "Oak Haven." Her heart pounded as she opened it. The message was just 3 lines. "I saw the news about your new firm. Congratulations. What I did was unforgivable. I'm sorry. Adrian Stone." It wasn't a plea for forgiveness, and it didn't erase the scars. But it was an acknowledgement, a sign that even a man as lost as Adrian could take a single, faltering step towards his own redemption. Celeste closed the laptop. Adrian was a ghost from a past life. Alistair came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, looking at the plans for her community centre, which was spread across her desk. "What do you think?" she asked, leaning back against him. "Should we add a rooftop garden?" "I think," he said, kissing her temple, "that our first joint project should be designing a home for us." She turned in his arms and smiled, her heart full. They had started with a fake blueprint for a relationship, but together they had built something true and lasting. They were finally designing their own lives on their own terms, together. And so Celeste's story comes full circle. From the depths of public humiliation to the pinnacle of personal and professional triumph. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest challenges are just opportunities in disguise, and the people who enter our lives in the most unexpected ways can be the ones who change them forever. Her journey wasn't just about redemption or revenge. It was about reconstruction, rebuilding her career, her confidence, and her heart on a foundation of truth. What did you think of Celeste and Alistair's story? Could you have been brave enough to accept his shocking proposal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story of strength and unexpected love. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another one of our emotional fiction journeys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.